Good evening. My name is Lillian Jones. This is a poster that was made by a grade 8 class. They were demonstrating what they learned about Indigenous teachings by having a folder of information that had no real order. They just flipped through on their own in a group and picked out pieces that they felt were important. They felt that were important for them to know and to teach others that had no idea about Indigenous people. My favorite part of their poster is the paddle that they have. They wrote down the rules of the canoe. For instance, Rule 1, every stroke we make is one less we have to take. Rule 2, there is to be no abuse of self or others. Rule 3, be flexible. And they spent the time writing all of these down, all the way to the last one, Rule 10. When given a choice at all, be a worker bee, make honey. They shared some of the things that happen in the elder moon, Sisit, December. And there are some activities that are done by the local people so that they could understand what the people lived like before colonization. I was really impressed with this piece. Teachings. Some of the stories that they created, or from the story folder, they created things like this. They wanted to show what was important to Indigenous peoples. And here's this really cool picture of this man here and that child there. And it says, chiefs are the most important people and children. Here's this girl with a rock, and it says, it is believed that people can turn into rocks. Trees are connected to the land and connected to them, the people. So they're just showing some ways that culture is important, or that nature is important and being kind is important to Indigenous peoples. And in the residential school folder, students made comparisons about what home would be like before residential school and what home was like at residential school. Kids made cards about what that experience was like. For instance, residential school survivors are more likely to suffer from various mental and physical health problems. They taught the First Nations to be ashamed of their culture. People as young as 3 had to go to residential schools. 7 a.m., the dormitory rooms were unlocked. I like this timeline. The First Nations were having a feast and relaxing. The new settlers believed they were superior to First Nations and started to build land. Then they made residential schools. The people took children so they can't get taught the religion, language, and traditions of their own people. And the timeline for residential school is 1876 to 1996. And this girl made a chart of the chores girls do, laundry and cooking, and boys, farming and carpentry. So since 1867, Indigenous people have been forced to stop speaking their own language and to learn to speak English. Although there wasn't a lot of time teaching them English because there was more time teaching them how to do physical labor. And that was what they created there. Now, I'm going to show you how when I was teaching students about what's important to Indigenous people in terms of canoeing, it's over here, pardon me. They were showing some of the different types of canoes, and I would give them in their folder a big picture of the canoe that each pair would have to work on and information about that canoe. And they were to jot down 5 facts, trace their canoe or paddle, and then make a good copy with those facts written on their paper. And I'll show you what they produced. Well, some of them. So here she says, the journey is what we enjoy. And the facts that they have around are, every stroke we take is one less we have to make. These canoes are 22 to 40 feet long. They are used for moving family cargo to seasonal camps. The canoes are decorated and carved with figures on the sides. Racing participants come from Vancouver, the mainland, Washington, and the United States. Racing canoes have names. The canoes are about 50 feet long for an 11-man crew. It's beautiful for some Canadian students that have never known anything about canoeing before. Here's a picture of a duck hunting canoe, a fright canoe, a knockabout canoe, and a seagoing canoe. Here's a picture of a pointed paddle. The pointed paddle is usually used by men. The sharp tip can be used to spear fish. The blade is 2.5 feet long and 5 inches wide. The paddle size is relative to the paddler. The handle is made out of a piece of wood. The paddle is made out of maple or yew wood. And the paddle is about 4.5 feet long. It has a canoe rule. Rule 4, the give of each enriches us all. And here's a picture of a boy with a paddle. And so after teaching them about canoeing, I wanted them to know about the land in which they live and learn. So I created a template where, pardon me, the librarian helped me. He helped me create the template of the land. And we had them we gave them the names of each territory, asked them if they knew where they were in English, and then had them spell those places in the language. So the territory that we were learning in was i7imesh. And they put a teaching up there. We must respect each other's heritage, and understand the importance of what i7imesh lost and how we can be a part of preserving culture from extinction. So there's Sycam, Bokwichin, Sartlip, and Sayote, and Pakals, Mount Finlayson, Malahat, and the Saanich Inlet. Every student made one of these, and they all learned how to say these names properly and how to spell them. Many of them, more than not, had no idea about this. In our story folder, we talked about the Great Flood because that's one of the things that happened in the area that we were at. And here's my favorite picture. So here's the Great Flood. And so long ago, tide water started to rise and people were worried because the water was reaching their homes. So they collected all their belongings and they put everything into the canoes, their salmon included. And they paddled to the tallest mountain and anchored their canoes with cedar rope. Finally, the whole mountain was covered in water. So here's a picture of the flood. You can see this is all water here. These are trees, and you can see some of the people that are paddling and tying their canoes to the trees with the cedar rope. And you can also see some of the homes down here. And you can see that there's some people dying, because that's what happened. Some people died in that flood. And again, about 90% of the kids that I worked with had no idea that this had happened in the territory that they lived in, that they learned and lived. This is a really good one too. The tidewater started to rise. The water finally reached the top of the mountain. They gathered their belongings. They started to paddle to the mountain, pardon me. They anchored there. And then at the end, what happened is they named the mountain Lawanu, the place of refuge and escape. And they called themselves the i7imesh people. The people who survived the flood are the ancestors of all the i7imesh today. When they traveled back to the village, there were people that stayed. The people that stayed there had all drowned. Again, just remembering the ancestors. All right. So that's really how I've been able to incorporate our teachings, our history, some language and baby steps into a classroom. And I have a unit that I've developed through that. I've researched the Indigenous history of the land by talking to the elders. I was able to look at some of their books that they had made in that area by elders, by knowledge keepers. And thank goodness, like I say, over time I was able to establish their trust. And I just really wanted to show you some of the most favorite pieces I had and my capstone, because I finally feel like I'm on my way, although